This video has been produced to support community engagement about the rate options study for Snowy Valleys Council. It's part of a series of videos as shown on your screen. I'd encourage you to start with the introduction video as this provides the background and context for what I'll go through specifically in relation to residential land for this video. As a starting point, we'll have a look at the current rating structure that's in place for residential land in each of the former councils. So firstly, in Tumut, you can see here the relationship between rates and land value. So as land value goes up, the rates go up, and that's what's known as the ad valorem rate, or rate in the dollar. But in each of the categories in Tumut, there is a $540 minimum rate. So you can see that below a certain threshold, here with residential, it's about $53,000, everyone pays $540 regardless of the value of their land. The former Tumbarumba Shire Council used the other option available under the Act, which is a base rate. So you can see here that everyone pays $232 as a base rate, and then the ad valorem is applied on top of it. When we compare the two, the system in Tumbarumba is arguably fairer. In Tumut, everyone below that $53,000 threshold pays the $540 minimum rate, regardless of the value of their land. In Tumbarumba, everyone's paying that $232 base rate, so everyone's making a contribution to the cost of the services, the benefits that they enjoy. But rates are also going up with land value, so there's that ability to pay principle coming in, and that's probably the key issue in this whole discussion, is how much influence land value should have on the rates people pay. When you look at the available tax information on incomes in different towns, you can see that there is a difference between the typical incomes in each town. But when we put this information alongside land values, you can see that there's not a strong correlation. Land values in Tumut are significantly higher than in Batlow, but there's not that same gap between people's incomes. So let's look at the options for the residential category, and to do this I'll be using a couple of charts that do take some getting your head around, but as they say, a picture tells 1,000 words, and to really understand these options and their impacts on different land values, you really do need to see it in these terms. So the chart I've added at the bottom there shows the distribution of property values in the former Tumba Shire, and you can see that generally they're at the bottom end of that scale. When I add the distribution from former Tumut Shire, you can see there's a lot more properties above that $60,000 mark. So here's option A for residential, which is shown by the green line in the chart above. This starts at the same point as the current rating system in Tumbarumba, and that's because the base rate is pretty much the same as what it is there now. The blue line that I've added at the bottom there shows the impact on ratepayers in Tumut under this option. For those at the lower end of the property values that are currently paying the $540 minimum, you can see that they'll receive quite a considerable saving of up to 30 or 40%. For that large number of properties in the mid-range, the $60,000 to $70,000 value range, you can see that the green line's slightly higher than the blue, so those people would pay about 15% more than they are. Then at the top end of the values in Tumut, you can see the green line's a little bit lower than the blue, so those people would see a small saving. The red line that I've added at the bottom there shows impacts of this option on ratepayers in the former Tumba Shire, and you can see that right across the red line is higher than the yellow line, which indicates that the rates would increase. And that simply reflects that when you bring together the rates of the former councils, Tumut's rates were higher, so when you put them together, the Tumbarumba rates increase. The thing to notice about this is that the increases for the majority of properties down at the lower end of the scale are moderate, around the 10% mark. But at the higher end of the properties in Tumbarumba, the increases are significant, around 25%. There's less properties at that end of the scale, but the increases are very significant. And this is where we've got to come back to the question of what is the fairest rating system. Under this option, someone with a property worth $40,000 would pay about $530 a year in rates, while someone with a property worth $80,000 would pay $840 a year in rates, 60% more. And you've got to ask whether that's fair, given that there is not a strong correlation between the value of land and people's ability to pay. Which is why option B is worth considering. The base rate here is higher, $344 a year, so that means everyone is paying closer to the same amount. Council would be generating 50% of its revenues from residential rates from the base rate in this case, and that's why the purple line is parallel with the red line, because at Tumbarumba at the moment, the base rate is actually generating 50% of the rates. You can see though that the impacts of this option on ratepayers with land of different values is quite different from option A though. In Tumbarumba, the impact in dollar terms at the higher and lower end of values is about the same. It's the difference in the base rate. But the increase in percentage terms is a lot higher at the lower end than at the top end. So in terms of the impacts on tument ratepayers, you can see those at the lower end currently on the minimum don't see as big a saving because of the higher base rate. Those in the middle do see a slightly greater increase than under the option A, but those at the higher end see a larger saving, again because of the higher base rate. So looking again at the rates people would pay on properties of different value, whereas in option A, the $80,000 block would attract 60% higher rates than the $40,000 block. Under this option, the gap between those comes down to about 40%. So in terms of fairness, if we're not sure that the person with the $80,000 block is far better positioned to pay higher rates, then it probably makes sense to reduce the gap between the amounts each of them pay. So moving on to option C for residential, this one has a lower base rate, and that has the effect of reducing rates for lower value properties and increasing them for higher value properties. And when we look at the impact of this option on ratepayers with different land values, you can see, particularly with that red line in Tumbarumba, that the higher value properties are paying considerably more, up to about 30%, while the lower value properties are seeing a few savings down at bottom end. So if we consider again the rates paid on a property valued at $80,000 versus $40,000, the gap between those two is now widened out to 67%. So when we look at these options side by side, you can start to see a bit better what's going on. Option A minimises the impacts for the majority of residential ratepayers in Tumbarumba, and that's why it was recommended in the study. Option B flattens out the rating structure, so it tends to increase the rates for lower value properties and decrease it for higher value properties. But if we're not sure that the people with higher value land are actually able to pay heaps more, then that's probably fairer. And option C really does push up the rates paid on higher valued land, which is arguably less fair, particularly for residential properties, given that the benefits that landowners receive, the value of the services that they enjoy, is pretty consistent from one block to another, regardless of the value of that land. So thanks for taking the time to watch this video and understand a little bit more about the options for rating of residential land in Snowy Valleys Council. And again, I'd encourage you to complete the survey available at the link shown on your screen.